know, forget about all this other bullshit. We're entertaining people, and if they're entertained, we've done our job properly.
She seems to have that invisible touch. She reaches in and she grabs right hold of your heart.
Oh, I loved it. It was great having hits.
'Cause Jesus, he knows me, and he knows I'm right.
In those days, there were no real rules. I think we were just trying to be a bit different, because the canvas in those days, in the 60s and the 70s, was pretty blank.
I'll give you the names of those you must kill. All must die with their children. Carry the heads to the palace of old. Hang them high, let the blood flow.
The basic feel was radically different than anything I'd ever done. Very British, actually.
It's not country, it's not rock, it's not jazz, you know, it's Genesis.
There must be some misunderstanding.
Very competitive band, no doubt about that. Very gifted, but with those gifts, you know, there's a certain price.
I can dance.
It was always, you know, beating each other into submission.
I can talk.
We pulled rank.
The only thing about me is the way that I walk.
Peter and I used to fight a lot, very close friends, but, you know, used to argue about silly little things.
No, he was a really awkward bastard. But we loved each other too, you know, it was a real bond.
They were at the forefront of what we now think of as prog rock. Then in the 80s, they were a massive rock/pop band on both sides of the Atlantic.
Just as I thought it was going all right, I found that I'm wrong when I thought I was right. So it's a shame, it's just a shame, that's all.
Genesis were never cool, and Genesis are proof that ultimately in rock music, brains win out.
I wanna be just a child.
There's something in the DNA of that group that's still connected, even though they're in different places.
Whenever sort of Spinal Tap is on or something and you see these moments, you think, I've been in a band like that. That's Genesis. No, they don't think so.
We had something that none of us could do on our own. I was at school, and I remember exactly which room I was in, and I heard this thing coming out of the radio, and Otis Redding was my hero at that time, I think. It felt very free, it was sort of hot, sexy, alive, and it had obviously come out of blues and pain and suffering.
Change has gotta come now. Ooh, yes it is.
The rigours of that school would have given them something to kick against.
There was a revolutionary impulse within them, I think, which is that despite the constraints of that, you know, very traditional public school education, they thought, we want to make a living out of music. It was music that got them through their day.
That's where Genesis developed this desire to create something that was elaborate and big and grand and sprawling, that kind of pushed those rigours out of their life.
The demo session was Mike and I saying, Tony, will you come and help us with the keyboards? And he said, yeah, I'll do it if my mate Peter Gabriel can come along and sing one song. It was called She Is Beautiful to start with. I'm not sure what it ended up as. It was a lovely song.
So we hustled our way into their session.
She is beautiful, very beautiful.
We'd done these demos, and it was OC's day, Old Carthusian Day. Jonathan King was spotted there.
I was a successful pop star, the first act on the London Top of the Pops show. And of course, I went back to Charterhouse in glory in my little Austin Healey Sprite. And one of the kids at Charterhouse rushed up to me with a grubby cassette tape that I still have to this day and said, oh, this is the school group, listen to it.
For them, you're just a product. For me, you're the one I love, baby.
The lead singer had the most wonderful voice, I thought. So I got in touch with them and said, look, I really like the sound of you. I'd like to produce you. And they said, oh, yes, please. I gave them the name Genesis because that, to me, was the start of my production career.
Vanity arrived with fame.
We did an album with them from Genesis Revelation, which was just bought by us and our friends. And, you know, and then pretty much that looked like it. And he sort of was losing interest in everything, which was fair enough.
I'm not very good with really good creative artists. I'm actually better with people just doing as I say because it's my work of art that I want to do.
My parents had a cottage near Dorking in Surrey, quite remote. They let us use it. You know, it was very turbulent. They're very strong characters, you know, and we were kind of slightly as a bit of a pressure cooker situation.
The guys never saw their girlfriends half the time. It was positively draconian. But we were too serious. We never went for walks. We weren't the sort of group to go down the pub and have pints and, you know, relax.
Ant was also probably the best musician at the time. He's the only one who could actually do something with his instrument.
And he kind of brought me on, really. He taught me some chords. Kind of early days in the writing sessions with Ant, it was 2 guitars. Ant and myself playing guitars, Tony keyboards, and Pete a bit of keyboards, you know, but more the vocals, really.
Sneaking away from school to come to these hippie events to then be offered to perform in an Atomic Sunrise Festival that sounded, you know, like a thing we couldn't say no to.
The Roundhouse was somewhere where, you know, concerts were not just concerts, they were happenings, you know, and it would be somewhere you'd go to commune with kindred spirits. People would sit and happily close their eyes and listen to songs that lasted 25 minutes. And Genesis, just at that time, fitted right in there.
And I remember finding it all starting to get terribly tense, and I used to get me very frightened.
I guess I'm doing that. Trying to find a memory in a dark room. Dirty man, you're looking like a Buddha, I heard him say. Yeah.
The Atomic Sunrise Festival, I remember mainly for there being more people on stage than there were in the audience. Tony and I, particularly Tony, were both Bowie fans from very early on.
Children of the summer's end, gathered in the dampened grass.
Bowie's band were very theatrical at the time, and it wasn't sort of Ziggy-type costumes. It was more sort of raiding the theatre costume department.
Then, of course, came the first official, if you like, Genesis album with Trespass, where they were starting to get their proper sound together. It's not quite there, but you can hear the seeds of what they became within it. And it has famously the track, The Knife.
And I looked at the guitar and I thought, I haven't got a clue, not a clue what comes next. And then I saw myself playing this thing, but it was really scary. I eventually just sort of went kablanc, really. I tried fighting through it, but I didn't make it.
Well, Anthony Phillips was a fantastic musician, was very much part of the original collective. And when he left, it could very easily have been the end of Genesis. We wouldn't be having this discussion because they did very seriously consider calling it a day.
That was a very, very significant loss. I mean, Ant leaving was far and away the most significant moment in Genesis history.
People don't quite realise how important a character he was. I would say he was very much the driving force.
I felt it was the right thing to do. If I hadn't left, they may never have got Phil Collins. So.
All I wanted to do was to be able to play the drums and to make enough money to live. It wouldn't be stardom or anything. I was a professional musician in a semi-professional band. The band would have day jobs and, you know, we'd all meet up, but I was the one that was actually existing on whatever we earned.
Phil comes along Dad's in insurance, he's a Hounslow boy, a good West London boy. But he does bring some creativity with him because Phil's mother, June, also worked with Barbara Speake at the Barbara Speake Stage School.
The first thing he did was bring this incredibly direct and brilliant musical drumming. He can play anything. He can play your soul music, your prog music, your jazz music, your fusion. He can play it, and he brought that incredible confidence, I think, to their sound.
You know, I was a stage school kid. I was from a very different background. I'd been playing music all my life, whereas music to them was a restricted subject. You know, I mean, you know, you weren't supposed to play guitar at Charterhouse. And they were kind of very precious. You know, it really mattered. You know, you're playing what kind of A chord? No, that's not the best inversion of the A. You know, I mean, things like that.
It's just unbelievable. The difference, I never, ever could have imagined in a million years the difference a drummer could make. Oh my God, it was unbelievable. He transformed the music.
It was very apparent to us that he was a really good drummer, you know, had a fantastic sense of rhythm and stuff, which we were all a bit stiff, you know.
He understood and felt things, and, you know, it was, thank God for me that I can talk to someone who actually knows the realities of life.
And he had a lightness as a personality too. He could joke and stuff and everything, you know, much better than... We were very intense.
It was very incestuous, you know. We did nothing but this. So obviously, you know, people got irritated with each other.
I remember storming out of when we were rehearsing one place, his first time with Phil. You know, it just must have been very difficult for him, I think. I was amazed he stayed.
All this friction or sort of tension that was under, you know, kind of under wraps, occasionally would boil over, and someone would get up and walk out, and did I miss something, or what happened? You know? And it'd be like, fuck you, off into the distance.
Because Phil felt like a professional who played with other musicians and was just getting on with the work, whereas we had all these intense, sort of dysfunctional family arguments going on.
They discuss these things under the kind of a sort of stifling cloak of British reserve, which is very typical of the public school boy. And I imagine that the workings of that band were quite mystifying to Collins, but I imagine he was something of a breath of fresh air.
It was always, you know, beating each other into submission. But that was fun. I mean, I was in a band, I was in a thinking band. You know, as far as I was concerned, it made a big change from what I'd kind of been playing.
And that was the first time that it felt like there was some chance of this combo gelling and delivering something with a bit of punch. Things that had seemed really hard work, you know, like pushing this big thing up a hill. Suddenly, it was downhill and we could smile.
When Steve Hackett joined, it was another kind of big moment in the Genesis story. Absolutely stunning musician. He could make a guitar sound like any instrument.
It was really a little bit like being thrown in at the deep end. I mean, I'd really been a legend in my own bedroom at that point. I could play screaming solos very, very quietly on this little radio that served as an amp, and then suddenly to work with a band.
We all met him at Tony's flat. And he was very dark, but he always gave the impression of being very serious, you know, with his black glasses, black hair.
I sat down and played 3 different styles of things to them, and I remember Pete famously saying, I think we can use the first style, I'm not sure about the other 2.
We liked his approach. He was a very accomplished guitarist without wanting to be a sort of a flash guitarist at all, you know, and he was interested in sort of combinations and all the rest of it.
Literally, and then there were 5, and that really was the classic band, and Steve he was just perfect.
Nursery Crimes, when they began to get a few sniffs at what they were doing, it went into the, scraped into the top 40, and you can hear the sound coalescing, coming together there. At the time, of course, it was called progressive rock. Involved no limits, basically, no barriers. So they were testing the barriers, learning how far they could push this, and realising that they could actually push it a lot further than 4x4 beat music.
Prog rock, if you were trying to explain it to an alien who just landed on Earth, I'd say songs that last 20 minutes plus, have mythical allegories and strange creatures in them, perhaps unicorns in the case of Genesis, and standing stones. There's something very, very English about Genesis's music that, to me, it's an England beyond psychedelia.
I'm lost within this
The guys were terrible at tuning the 12 strings, and they would take sometimes 5 minutes between songs. Everyone looks at the singer. Entertain us, So that's what I realized I had to start doing.
He's not particularly at ease with an audience until he became someone else,
The first time he ever wore a costume was obviously his infamous time in Dublin in the boxing ring. He hadn't told us about it, which is just as well, because we've never let him do it.
There's quite a long instrumental passage in the middle, and Peter went off. He certainly didn't tell Tony Banks, because I think rightly he thought that Tony would veto it.
I was always afraid that these guys, would start arguing about any of the visual costume bit that I was trying to do, and so I would bring the stuff in. I'd smuggle it in as late as possible when they were so preoccupied with getting everything else sorted that I could sort of get away with whatever shit was in my head.
Peter's impulse to dress up in these elaborate clothes and his wife's dress with the fox's head. I mean, for him, it was shyness, as I understand. I mean, he was a beautiful young man, but he was not sexually confident in the stagey way like Jagger was. And he wasn't even as sort of committed to the personas as Bowie was at that point.
So, the likes of Bowie were doing it, the likes of Mark Bolan, the wearing of makeup, all that kind of stuff, which didn't go down well across the Atlantic. Americans, what are these Brits doing in frocks? We don't want any of that. We want rock and roll, rock and roll.
I'll be waiting here so long. I know this time that passed me by.
It was dark. It was a sort of dark energy, and it was scary to people and shocking.
He didn't run it via the committee. He bullishly went ahead and did it. And if he hadn't, I suspect that Genesis perhaps would not have gotten as far so quickly.
Brought the house down.
It put a naught on the end of our earnings. The costumes at that point were not intrusive. I mean, they kind of just seemed to be part of what Genesis were, and I was all for it.
I am the voice of Britain before the Daily Express. My name is Britannia.
Foxtrot, I think, is where most Genesis fans agree that that's where they really broke the roof and went to another dimension.
It's one of those things where you get popular, and then by the time you never really get it. You sort of, oh my God, there's all that. And you get to that level and you think, oh my God, there's all that. So we didn't realise until we came to New York, probably, that just how vast America was and how much there was to do.
Watcher of the skies, watcher of all. Is the world alone? No world is his own.
American rock in the 70s was very, very American, and the British rock that they liked was working with American DNA. So they liked the Stones because it was blues. So you had your Bob Seger and your Lynyrd Skynyrd, and then you had your art rock, your Iggy and Stooges and Velvet Underground. And in a way, it was a different language.
This is quite a challenge, you know. I mean, we were not downhearted by this. You know, you may be big over here, but over here you don't mean anything. This was America, you know. This was the America that we'd all heard about and read about. Just to stay in a Holiday Inn, you thought, this is the Holiday Inn. You know, this is the Holiday Inn. It's their famous rock and roll hotels, you know. People get banned from these. So it was all experience. And I can't remember ever feeling jaded by it or like depressed by it. It was like we were touring America. That's what you wanted to do.